Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you to OhioExopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider. We are back on Fukushima. We've got another Fukushima Roundtable. I've got three guests on that I will introduce very shortly. I just want to let everyone know and remind everyone exactly what happened at Fukushima. The Fukushima disaster started on March 11th, 2011, when a powerful earthquake hit the area of northern Japan in the Pacific island called Honshu. The earthquake was followed by a tsunami which killed 20,000 people and knocked out the cooling systems on three reactors at Fukushima Daiichi. Reactor 1, 2, and 3 have now been in a core meltdown for the past 3 years. What that means is that the three barriers that exist for the containment have been breached. The zirconium alloy for the fuel rods, the steel barrier of the nuclear reactor, and the concrete building that surrounds the reactor. Right now we have what's called corium, which is the nuclear fuel that has melted down. The fuel rods have melted down, and they have burned through the steel containment vessel. And the corium has pierced the containment vessel and fell on the concrete containment and has burned its way through the concrete probably at this point. So what we've had is a wide open nuclear reaction spewing radioactivity into the environment. I want to introduce my guests and get them involved in the conversation here. I've got James Horak on the line, Torz, and Mhairead McDonald. Welcome to the show, guys. How are you today?
Hello,
We're fine.
Thank you.
Our pleasure to be here.
Yes, indeed. Thanks very much for having us.
My pleasure very much. I want to dive into things. Maybe I'll start with James. James, I think the most important thing to remember here is that we've had no containment at all on those reactors for almost 3 years now. That means we have radioactivity spewing into the atmosphere, into the ocean. They're pumping the water out that's accumulating around the reactors and placing them into these large fuel tanks that are filled with radioactive water. Some of them are leaking. I think we have a disaster which threatens our entire biosphere. I'd like for you to comment on that.
There's no doubt of that. The indications are that the cores have gone through the flooring of concrete and are on their way down to the mantle. And if they hit the mantle, we're going to have a problem that these people have not anticipated.
I don't know if you want to go into that yet, James, but do you want to elaborate a little bit on what's the possibility that if the core hits the mantle, what might happen?
Well, I've discussed in my work and in a number of shows that the moon is controlled, is kept in orbit by machines that are on the moon and engines that are on Earth. These engines are placed just above the mantle and operate like a dipstick. But the set of conditions and settings that keep this system functioning will be disrupted entirely once that mantle is disturbed. So you'll lose the moon. It'll want to come into Earth, but it'll be kept from coming into Earth. You'll lose it.
I want to bring Mhairead into this conversation now. We were talking a little bit before the show, and you mentioned that you thought that splitting the atom was an abomination, and you also talked a little bit about Oppenheimer, who quoted the Vedic texts when they first started to explode atomic bombs. Can you comment on any of that?
Well, I suppose I was thinking about that because I saw a post today that was about the Vedas. And, you know, I think if I go back to how I became a person who was against nuclear, it really goes into my living in an area where I'm not so very far away from Lane, which has the Trident submarines going past. So in Scotland, we're quite aware of the nuclear issues because we've got the main event happening. You know, we're a big target because of that. And I think from when I was about 19 or 20, I was really aware of it because the American submarine base was here. They'd been here since World War II. The agreement was that they would only stay for a short time, but they ended up staying, I think it was 25 years, probably more than 25 years in the area. And again, it was all nuclear-powered submarines. So when you have that kind of in your face, you do a bit of reading around it. And I was saying earlier, I'm no expert. I don't have a very good scientific mind, and I'm not good with figures and numbers and things like that. I just go with my intuition. You read people's testimonies. You read about how people have been treated within the nuclear industry, particularly after Chernobyl. The huge cover-ups there.
You're far too modest, Mhairead.
Well, it's just, I mean, I'm trying to put across that anyone can do a bit of reading and learn, and I think that one of the issues around Fukushima is the enormous amount of data that people are being hit with every single day, and a lot of that is disinformation. And I think that's deliberate. I think it's put out there to stop people from taking it further and looking, and they'll make jokes about things like the giant squid Photoshop that came up recently on Facebook, and they will forget the fact that we are seeing proper data coming out from the oceans. We are seeing evidence that, there's trouble in the deep seas, and tuna fish, for example, definitely radiated and that kind of thing. So you need to kind of get your hat on and sit down and actually read and look through the documentaries that are available while we still have this information out there, because some of it's starting to disappear, which happens with a lot of things. A lot of these topics, you start to dig deep and you notice that there's certain articles aren't there anymore and that kind of thing. But the opposite end of the spectrum to what James is talking about in his field, and Torz as well, they're coming from their experience and what they know, and I come from my experience and what I know. And on a personal level, I was involved a little bit with the CND. I did go to a protest, but I didn't take part. I was an observer. And unfortunately, I was working for the American Navy at the time. So I think I got spotted with my little clipboard because I didn't get any work after that from them. I was employed as a nursery nurse in the local nursery school, so that's quite funny. But not as passionate an activist as, say, Kevin Blanche or Christina Consolo and some of the ones that are out there that, they are not getting paid to do any of it, and they just have given up so much of their time to wake people up. Because I agree with Kevin in that Fukushima, we don't want to see any more of them, and in fact we might not survive this one. So it could be the one that breaks the back of nuclear power and all that corruption and all that evil that they've been getting away with far too long. And I believe in that, and I don't think you need to have much in the way of scientific knowledge to get that. You just watch a few films. I've passed on stuff to Torz, nagged her to watch things that have made her cry, because she's a mother. She's a mum. I'm not a mum. I don't have any children, and it's unbearable to watch some of these things even without having kids. But to think this is a future we're handing over, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that it's terribly, terribly wrong.
I want to just throw something in here, and then I want to pull Torz in this conversation. What I see in the age that we're living in is, unfortunately, people are becoming more and more obtuse and indolent, and they have a hard time. They're almost irritatingly insensitive and slow to understand. And Torz, I would like to hear your thoughts on how the mainstream media has ignored this and how uneducated the public is on the threat that Fukushima has for our entire biosphere.
That's quite an interesting question, actually, because as much as I work a lot with James, and yes, Mhairead does badger me with lots of links and everything I do, I kind of took a step back over the last couple of years because I had to be with my family in order to be there for them. So I have been able to see the perspective from the general public, as it were. And to be fair, they just haven't got a clue. They really haven't got a clue. You mentioned Fukushima to them, and they're just like, oh, well, that happened a couple of years ago, didn't it? It's all sorted now, surely.
Yeah.
And you just see that kind of blank ... in their eyes, and you just think, wow, where do I start? Where do I start? I mean, I have on the kitchen I have on the kitchen cupboard a note that reminds my children every morning that they have to take their Lugol solution, which is a potassium iodide, 2 drops in milk once a day, every day, to prevent them from their body intaking in the radiation. And they do it. The problem then comes, like this morning, my daughter had 2 of her friends sleep overnight because there's this great big sign on the door that says, take your iodine twice a day, this, that, and the other. And Heather tried to explain, Heather's 13, she tried to explain to her friends what Fukushima was, because obviously my children are very, very clued up as to what's going on in the world. They don't have a choice. They live with me. And her friends got really scared. I mean, really scared, because, bless her, she mentioned the word leukemia and cancer in the same sentence as nuclear radiation and things like that. So she scared them. And I said to them, look, the last thing I need you to do is to go back to your parents and frighten them with something that you heard in my house, because they won't understand and they will not have a knowledge base to build from as to why you need to be taking this. So I did explain it to them. And yes, I am expecting a phone call from said parents in the next couple of days, which is thanks, Heather. But it does show that the level of knowledge is non-existent. Therefore, these children are lucky because they do visit my house. In fact, a lot of them visit my house deliberately to find out what actually is going on, because I do talk to them very much as adults, not as children, and I let them know what's going on. But if they're not seeing it at home, and all they're seeing at home is the mainstream media, then the mainstream media are not reporting it in any way, shape or form. And if they are, they're playing it down to a level whereby people are lulled into a false sense of security whereby, oh yes, we can sort this out. It's nothing to worry about, don't worry about. Here, look at this person acting ridiculously in this video. That will distract you. And it's a distraction technique, and we see it all the time. So yeah, we have a problem.
I'd like to address this question to James. James, I sometimes tell my colleagues at work about Fukushima and bring things up. And it's really interesting. What I notice is a little bit of a glaze comes over their eyes because they've already forgot what Fukushima is. And they're a little bit embarrassed to say, well, what is Fukushima? And then I go on to kind of explain what's really been happening for the past 3 years. And I think we're seeing an incredible amount of let's just say we have our work cut out for us when it comes to trying to get this information out. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that, James.
The people do not see the double-edged sword of the phenomena that they experience in the media every day. On the one hand, we're told that there's a terrorist threat, and that's supposed to justify all of the measures being taken by FEMA and Homeland Security and TSA to infiltrate and impose themselves upon our privacy in the most critical and most crucial and most crude ways. So this is done to us, but at the same time, the existence of these reactors in our country and the fact that the enemy wouldn't have to have IRCBMs or ICBMs to do the same thing, all they have to do is knock out one of these reactors or more. In the long run, they've done more damage than a hydrogen bomb. And we're seeing that from Fukushima. Fukushima is a witness to the fact of the danger of these reactors, fast breeder reactors, and what we can expect from any enemy if it was a realizable enemy. So we're told all this garbage. If we followed it to its logical ramifications, to the end result, to the inevitability, we'd realize, by God, these people are bigger enemies than any of the enemies they project, because they hang our rear ends out to dry by building these things, by building them substandard to costs, and then give a perfect target to an enemy that could knock one out with an RPG. So they want to have their cake and eat it too at the expense of credibility, logical absurdity, and everything else if we just stop and think. But that's the thing. People are not stopping long enough to think. And their opinions are being formed by a media that is owned and operated by the very same people that own these reactors and own big corporations that profit off these military-industrial contracts. And, of course, there is a tie-in with the nuclear industry as far as suppliers of electricity and the military. So there's a love affair with them and with nations that are dependent upon this kind of resource, you can call it that. But ultimately, it is a death knell for all of us.
Sorry, I was just pick up on a really interesting point James just said there about the media. I mean, I haven't watched the news for years, but I did actually turn it on over the Christmas period. And the media use broadcast mind control in order to control the population of the planet. We all know this. Anybody who knows what they do understands how they do it and why they do it. Unless something is repeated every 10 minutes for weeks on end, it doesn't sink in to the consciousness of the population that are actually watching it. So therefore it does not become an alarm, and those trigger signals do not go off. The mainstream media does not continually sprout that there is a problem. There is a big problem with Fukushima. We are all in big trouble. So therefore people do glaze over, Mark. It is just not going in because it is not coming from the box in the corner. Therefore, it does not exist.
Wow, that's a really good point, Torz. I'm going to bring up Project MKUltra just for a minute. MKUltra is the code name of a U.S. government covert human research operation experimenting in behavioral engineering of humans, which is mind control. And they used the following on U.S. and Canadian citizens during testing. They tested drugs, LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, sexual abuse, and torture. Was done on both U.S. and Canadian citizens in this Project MKUltra. Torz, I don't know if you have any more expertise, but I'm real interested that the fact that you brought up mind control. Can you elaborate on that any more?
I can, but I'm not sure it's appropriate to the conversation that we're trying to discuss tonight, apart from the fact that we do live in an altered state of consciousness whereby we are fed information, like I said, via the media, which is broadcast mind control. Broadcast being broadcast on the airwaves. Mind control being they teach us how to think and what to think and how to feel. And it's something that's been going on for quite a long time, and I don't want to get too deep into the word mind control personally. But if you look at the general populace, then that's exactly what they are. They are mind controlled because they cannot think for themselves. They do not own their own minds. They will not go and look for the information that needs to be sought out. And when presented with information such as Fukushima, such as anything that should make them stop and think and then become angry and question why, they're not there. We have so many people on this planet that have absolutely no idea what is going on. And it's only when you only need to scratch the surface in order to, to turn your hair white overnight. God forbid you should actually go down the rabbit hole because it has really sharp teeth.
There's a really good film out. It's called A Globalist Agenda for a Dumbed-Down Domesticated Society. It was done by a man named Alan Watt. And Alan Watt talks about Zbigniew Brzezinski, the National Security Advisor for President Carter, who stated that shortly the public would be unable to think and reason for themselves. Eventually, he said that the public would expect the media to do all their thinking and reasoning for them. And this is what has happened today. People cannot think outside of the programming of television. Mhairead, do you have any comment on any of this?
Yeah, well, I would just agree with what everyone's saying and go back to what I said earlier, in that I come from the approach of someone who has had to teach myself in order to understand Fukushima. And I'm not a nuclear physicist or whatever, but at the same time, I'm sort of 52, 53. So for my generation, I think we're not quite as controlled as the ones coming up. If you see what I mean, it's like each generation that's been exposed to the level of media lies and manipulations and social engineering, it's like they do not question, or they don't recognize the signs that something is terribly wrong. I mean, the first thing I did when I started to look into Fukushima was I remembered Chernobyl. And I was in my early 20s when that happened. And I vividly remembered they told us not to go out in the rain, and they also said something about not drinking the milk. I did have friends who were in D&D as well, so that kind of magnified the event in my mind. And I remember thinking, well, how much was covered up at Chernobyl? Because I'm not the same person I was when I was in my 20s. Do you see what I mean? It's like you develop, you grow, you read, you question. If you allow yourself to do that, that's only natural, isn't it? But what I see in people around me is that they don't, it's like Torz was saying, they don't want to know, or they're incredibly frightened straight away. And I'm not saying it doesn't scare me. It does scare me. I want to know. I still want to know the truth. I'm driven by that. And I hate being lied to by these people, and I hate seeing unnecessary suffering. And if this continues on, the suffering that we're going to witness is going to be on a horrific level. So what's it going to take for people? Is it going to take the fact that someone tells them if they eat the tuna fish from the Pacific that they're very likely to get leukemia or whatever, or friends of them, their friends getting cancer, AML leukemia or whatever, when they're really young and dying horrifically in front of them? I mean, it's pretty horrific thinking that, but what is it going to take? I don't know.
Well, I think that Snowden's only problem, as I see it, is that he trusted Greenwald, and Greenwald is proving out to be a problem. Yeah, he's trying to make money with those documents. Greenwald has gone to Israel and compared a farmer spy that was a spy for Israel and actually did more damage to the United States people than all the Soviet spies during the Soviet era, during the Cold War, combined. Pollard. This idiot, Greenwald, is comparing him favorably with Snowden, saying, well, if you grant Snowden on amnesty, there's grounds to grant Pollard. No, there isn't.
So what you said earlier on sounds true, that nobody in the media can actually tell the truth, because if they do, then they're just disappeared with.
Or they have, like the people that we see in the alternative community, they're willing plants, they're making money, they're members of the cottage industry, and they cannot be trusted. And Crystal last night did a spectacular job on outing three of them.
Well, let me dive into this conversation. I kind of took a break while you guys continued a very interesting conversation. I want to hear again what James was saying about Zbigniew Brzezinski.
There were two of the right hands of Kissinger beginning in the 70s, and there are three, actually, if you count Gorbachev. All of these were educated in the United States. All of them were globalists and committed to globalism in the worst possible way. Brzezinski was one of them, Shevardnadze was one of them, and Gorbachev was the other. And all of them have done whatever they could to stir conflict among any of the republics of the former Soviet Union that had tried to develop along democratic lines. Shevardnadze was behind destabilizing a constitutionally elected president in Georgia. The problems in the Ukraine right now are being instrumented and sponsored and subsidized by the CIA. And these three men have been ahead of it all. They've orchestrated it, have used all of the intrigue and all of the intelligence services that are compliant with the New World Order and with the present motives and agendas of the CIA that works primarily for the oil companies and has all along.
Well, the thing about this that makes no sense to me is that, okay, we have the globalists and they have their depopulation agenda and people have heard about things like that, but they have to be incredibly insane, they have to be psychopaths or whatever, because this radiation and everything that's going on has got to negatively affect them, doesn't it?
It is very difficult to explain to people that madmen are making policy. It's very difficult to grasping with the notion that the world is not in danger from ET or from lizard people or reptilians or from the devil or whatever. It's in danger from your own kind gone insane, bred to be insane. They take their young, they don't get motherly love. They go to these boarding schools, and then they go to military academies. They're made into monsters. And those that can't be made into monsters are either killed or put into asylums or whatever. And we're talking about the children of the elite. You know, people have a hard time understanding how anyone can be dehumanized. But, of course, if you have a gene for it to begin with, like the Rothschilds, it's practically easily obtained.
That's very interesting. That's a slant on this that I never thought of. They're kind of brought up this way. Mhairead, do you have any comment on any of this?
I'm trying to think of something to say that won't get me into trouble.
Well, you don't have to worry about not getting into trouble. I think we can just kind of speak our minds here.
I could, if I spoke my mind, you wouldn't be able to put me on air because I'd probably get sweary about certain
curse words? You would use curse
families.
Words?
I'm in the UK, remember, and I'm Scottish. That should sort of,
now,
say all.
Now, the UK doesn't have free speech, technically, correct?
No.
Not really. Not when it comes to certain people.
No.
Certain families that wear a lot of bling.
And it's very, very, very frowned upon. Very frowned upon.
Yeah, but I mean, James has spoken out about what I'm talking about, but yeah, I think there's a detachment that happens as well, and it's deliberately encouraged in the class system before you even go into the kind of the gene side of it. Within a class structure, particularly in this country, it's incredibly obvious, and I've worked for people like that, and it's like they're in a bubble. It's like they're in a cocoon. They're protected by their elite status, their money, their so-called breeding, their education, and they don't think the way. Well, my experience was that they didn't think the same way as I did about the world around me.
There is a historic example, and I'm sure that everyone has heard it, but they may not be thinking of it. And that was when Marie Antoinette was told that the people have no bread. She was wondering why they were stirring up in the streets and rioting, and she was told, well, they have no bread. And her reply was, well, let them eat cake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very much a completely different mentality, one that just does not encompass us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they have no connection to the common man, to the working class. They have looked upon the working class as an enemy all along. To break the back of labor, they intimidated labor when Reagan came in. What's the first thing that Reagan did? He fired all the air traffic controllers because they had struck, and that was the only union in America that had unanimously supported him.
Wow, that's an interesting point. I'm going to try to play a clip here. I'm not sure how well you guys will be able to hear this. This is from InfoWar, which I'm sure you've all heard, and it talks about Senator Ron Wyden, who's a pretty decent guy. He went out and visited the Fukushima facility and issued an urgent warning that Fukushima is a very precarious situation. And he talks about this makeshift wall with bags of rocks that are really the only barrier between Fukushima and another tsunami. And it also talks about the former Japanese ambassador that had stated that the fate of the world is depending on reactor number 4.
The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant has become yet a renewed concern for the fate of life on our planet, especially in the northern hemisphere, which is, of course, strongly affected by the wind patterns of whatever radiation might be released from Fukushima. In fact, some are claiming that a very large amount of radiation has already been released, and by claiming, I say that with a bit of satire because, of course, it's happened. Multiple meltdowns already happened, and that cover-up is being called Plume Gate. So just search that term if you want to learn more, Plume Gate. And now Senator Ron Wyden who actually is a pretty decent guy. I used to live in Oregon in his district when he was a congressman, and I don't agree with all his politics, obviously, but pretty decent guy. Really within the system, he tries to help people more than most, I would say. And he went out and visited the Fukushima facility to have a look for himself. And when he came back, he issued an urgent warning. He put it right on his own website, the government website, Senate website, and he said that it is a precarious situation, and he said that the entire facility is only protected from a second tsunami by something that he called the bags of rocks placed there, a makeshift wall, he said, made by bags of rocks placed there by hand. That's not going to survive a tsunami. That's not going to stop a giant tidal wave coming in, not even a chance. Now, at the same time, a former Japan ambassador has gone on the record and made a statement saying that, quote, the fate of the world depends on reactor number 4. Those are his words. So there's been a lot of increasing concern about the spent fuel rods that are in the pools that now have open access to the environment, and what might happen if there is a subsequent earthquake or a tsunami, which could happen theoretically at any time. It's largely unpredictable.
So, James, I personally think the whole world is threatened, the whole biosphere is threatened by Fukushima. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely it is. Let me put something in perspective here about terminology. They talk about the fuel rods, and they use the word spent. Spent means dead. Spent means it's over. That's a lie. These fuel rods still have a great deal of radiation. The pellets in them can be high-graded back to fuel grade or even weapons grade. That's how Israel obtained its first atom bomb, by stealing spent fuel rods that were being sent by freighter from American installations to the Atlantic Trough to be dumped. They pirated the ships, and they took these so-called spent fuel rods back to Israel and high-graded them and made them weapons grade. That's how they obtained their first atom bombs. So people get this false impression. Well, what's so special about reactor building number 4? I mean, the reactor was offline when the tsunami hit. They can't imagine the fact that not only were there thousands of tons of spent fuel rods in there that were hot and needed cooling, just like those in the core, but that there was MOX fuel, which is plutonium, and that was 100 times or at least 10 times, depending upon the concentration of plutonium in the fuel rods, more lethal. This was experimental. Another thing, in the other cores, over the other reactors, they were storing the spent fuel rods that had been used in those cores. Now, these fuel rods will diminish in power, and they move them, but they're not spent. They have digressed in power output. That's all. Now, if the Queen of England, who owns most of the uranium deposits, didn't need desperately to make another $1 trillion, these could be reutilized. You wouldn't have the waste. You wouldn't need to drop it in the Atlantic Trough where so much of our oxygen is being produced. And you could cut costs. You could do a number of things. But the fact of the matter is, no. It's more profitable to a monster in the world, the head monster, to make her $1 trillion more. And you see, I've just committed a crime if I was English. I've spoken against the Queen.
Well, that's a good point. And I think in Japan now, if you're a journalist and you do any investigative journalism into Fukushima, you can be at risk, go to jail for 10 years.
Or they just assassinate you. You know, it's not official, so we ought to feel better, right?
Yeah, but at what point what we need is a consensus amount of people who all speak out together. What we're seeing here is individual people who are putting their lives on the line to actually tell the truth that everybody should know. And yet again, it goes back to the same old things whereby most of the important information is hidden from the rest of the world. At what point is that going to tip the scales to the point whereby we now live in a world where no one will want to live or can live? how far are we away from that point now? That's the important question. And more to the point, what can we do about it to fix it before it's too late?
That's where it gets real interesting, because I think we are a lot closer to that world that is really, really bad than most people realize. Torz, I want to just go off topic here a little bit, and I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your work with James. I mean, first of all, are you in the UK?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am.
And how did you and James kind of start working together?
Ooh, now you're taking me back. I'm going to dredge my memory as if I didn't know.
Did you start interviewing James? Is that how that worked?
No, not at all. I heard James, a mutual friend who's unfortunately no longer with us, the beloved Kevin Smith, who started all of this. James was on Kevin's show, and I've been a lifetime searcher for the truth, I suppose you could call it, because I always felt that there was something more that I wasn't being told. So I'm a researcher, I'm a digger, I'm a journalist also, so I dig. And I heard James's interview with Kevin, and it was as if someone had cleared away all the cobwebs in one foul swoop. And I just recognized something in what James was saying that just felt right. It felt like the truth. And I contacted him. I just wrote to him and said, I'm very interested in what you have to say, and can you give me some more information? And I offered to help in any way that I possibly could. And as they say, the rest is history.
Torz, do you think Kevin Smith was killed? I know that's a bit off topic again.
That's how long is the string? I'm sure there are many theories out there. I'm just going to make this about me. I had my suspicions, but how will we ever know? At the end of the day, we lost someone, everyone lost someone who was willing to speak out when others wouldn't, and broach topics which many people would never even consider, and who worked really, really hard. So who knows? I wouldn't like to say, but the timing was iffy. And I know Kevin was working on something interesting.
Well, not only did we lose Kevin Smith, but we've lost Philip Coppens, we've lost Patrick Cook, we've lost Dr. Tom Van Flandern. I had Dr. Rita Louise on the show not long ago. Her husband died mysteriously of one of these fast-acting cancers. There's something really strange going on here. James, do you have any comment?
I spoke to Kevin the day he came home from the hospital. He had a heart attack, and they had put stents in his heart. And he was very up, in fact, more so than the few times prior that I'd spoken with him, looking forward to the future. And we chatted, and he said, you want to be on my show on Monday? And I said, sure, what are we going to talk about? And he said, I haven't decided. But he was animated about it and really had his mind on something. He just didn't let me know because he hadn't made it up. But we had been talking about a couple of things, and could have been one of those things, could have been something else. But Kevin got information from people who used him that were potential whistleblowers, but just had not gone to the point where they wanted to cross that line for fear of their family, what might happen to their families, or their profession, or their security. So Kevin would get in the ballpark with some of the things that he wanted to talk about, and he would go from there on. He had his mind on something, and I was very surprised to learn he had died. It hit me really hard because Kevin could be uncompromising with the truth. And I know for a fact that Kevin had been made offers, big money offers, if these people that were making the offers could edit his show, could more or less tone him down. So one day I mentioned to Kevin, I said, Kevin, I know you've probably been punished having me on your show so often, because I'd been on his show a number of times, and he wouldn't say a word. And I knew enough about Kevin to know that when he didn't talk about something and you were asking him, that was his way of saying, yeah, but I don't want to talk about it.
Mhairead, I'd like to get your thoughts on all of this, because you're kind of a lay person a little bit that's been kind of listening to some of these programs and that has come to a level of awakening, and you've also, just talking to you before the show, I've come to the conclusion that you're very articulate. You've done your homework. What do you think about some of the things that we're talking about here? This strange Orwellian kind of control structure that's being placed over the whole world now. I mean, you're in Scotland, right? You're seeing this happen as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, we have quite an important year this year. 2014 is a lot of political discussion about going independent, and on a political level, that's quite interesting. So that's one part of life here. The other part is that it's quite fascinating if you have an out there conversation with a taxi driver, and if I just throw a ball out and say, have you seen a UFO? You get the most incredible stories. Because Scotland, I think, like Ireland as well, we've still got that in us. We've still got that open curiosity, sense of wonder. It's in the folklore. All of that has always intrigued me. So that's been my background. And I also saw a UFO when I was quite young. I was 18, and funnily enough, I was in New Zealand when I saw it. Something interesting in the sky, and I never really forgot that planted a seed at that time. So not as big a digger as Torz, but probably the same just in different ways. I didn't listen to Kevin Smith. I didn't hear that show that James did. I have heard it since, though, and it's amazing. And it was 2010, I think, that show, if I'm right, and that was the year when people were seeing things in the sun, and there was a real buzz going on about it all. And at that time, I think from sort of 2007 onwards, I started to really dig deep into the whole exopolitics thing and what was going on with the way the world was working. And you talk about Orwellian, dystopian side of things. I've read a lot of those books. I've read a lot of Margaret Atwood. And these people explore on a creative level, and at the same time they're drawing on what could possibly happen. And it's quite interesting to read that. And then just you see it, you actually do see a lot of what Orwell talked about. In fact, far worse than what he envisaged in his book 1984 is happening.
James, I used to listen to Kevin Smith, and whenever you would come on the show, it was so enjoyable. Now, this is just because I'm a strange guy, but I enjoy having my mind blown, and you would always blow my mind.
You want to try living with it for the last 4 years. Oh, yes.
So, Torz, again, I'm kind of interested in, so you listened to Kevin Smith, and then you kind of contacted James, and now you guys have worked together on the website, emvsinfo.com?
Yeah, emvsinfo.blogspot.
Torz built that. Torz built that blog.
I had never, well, let's put it like this. I heard James's information, and how do I explain it? It was as if a light bulb had gone. I'd searched all my life for what I thought was the truth, and nothing ever felt right. Nothing ever answered questions that I had, more to the point. And when I say answer questions, I mean really answer questions which clicked, questions which some part of me remembered, some part of me recognized. And I struggled with everything, and I searched and searched and searched until I heard James, and it literally, I can remember to this very day, stood in the middle of the room, and I went cold. I literally went cold, and it was as if time stopped around me. It was as if my whole life up to that point had been waiting and preparing me for hearing that interview, the first part and the second part. And I knew that I'd found what I was looking for with regard to answers. And I badgered him. He didn't really get a choice, to be fair, and I wanted answers. But there's also another part of this equation. There's a gentleman, one of our colleagues, called Shuni, a Meta One, and he is part of this as well, because without him, we wouldn't have the website. Yes, I put it all together and, But he did all the videos and all the audio and edited everything and made it clean, and he still does. So it's a group thing. It's not one person. It's not me. It's not James. It's not Shuni. All of us have come together to put this information out. And can I always add that we do it for free? We never charge for anything, because the truth should never be charged for. And if you're charging, as far as I'm concerned, then you're making a buck off something.
You know, Torz, I want to kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit, because I've tried to do the same thing. I try to not ever charge for anything. And it's really interesting. I notice when I do an interview with James, sometimes it takes the public a little time, but you can see the numbers accumulating and accumulating on those interviews as people finally get around to paying attention to some of the things that he's had to say. I'd like to hear you comment on that.
That's a very good point. I realized that I had something that needed everybody else to hear, and if you want to call it, I dropped a pebble in a pond. With help, I dropped a pebble in a pond, and I have watched over the last 4 years the ripples spread outward. And I'm very proud of what James has achieved. I'm very proud of what everybody that's been involved with James, and that's not just me, that's everybody, Mhairead, Crystal, all the people that have ever interviewed him. And James himself has given us information which, once heard, is very difficult to ignore, because it strikes you on a conscious level whereby it is something that is remembered and it's something that sits right. Mm. And it's just grown exponentially. And it's exactly what you said. Once you introduce people to James, to begin with, they're like, whoa, that's really deep. I don't know if I can handle that. But then you say to them, no, just listen again. Just listen to what he's saying. And they do. And those people tell other people, and those other people tell other people. And we need to listen to what he's saying, because I don't know if we can get through this without the information that he has for us.
Mhairead, did you have something you wanted to add?
What's interesting is that we've got past 2012, and my involvement really didn't come into this with James and Torz. It's only about a year ago. And for me, my experience was I was on Twitter, and that was in 2010, and just being completely and utterly led down all the wrong paths, and a lot of that was deliberate. So I've got a sort of insider's view in what it's like to get manipulated and kind of, deliberately sabotaged, if you like. And I think it's important that people understand that your intuition will eventually kick in, and you'll know what's right when you hear it, because it makes absolute sense. Because the New Age movement is particularly, it's so polluted. So much of it is just a load of absolute nonsense. And if all those people who are paying attention to that came on board and said, right, enough is enough, we have to stop this now, we have to address these problems, then, we could maybe get somewhere. But what I see a lot of the time is that, again, what we mentioned at the beginning, the disinformation, the distraction. So I'm hoping that 2014 is going to be a cleaner year in terms that people actually realize that they need to find out that the right information is out there, and it's not, it might not be pleasant, it might not be pretty, but a lot of it is very, very beautiful as well. A lot of what James says makes sense. Like you were talking about your mind being blown, and that's true. Because even when you have a conversation with James and he's making his coffee or whatever, he'll come out with something, and you're like, what? Torz will say the same, and you go, really? And you ask him questions, and you're just having a chat, and you ask him questions, and he'll tell you all the stuff, and you're like, of course, well, that makes perfect sense, So, but the blog is wonderful. The blog is, you find out it's like an online book with fabulous pictures,
I want to bring James into this conversation because the chat room is starting to fill up with some names I've never seen before. So maybe, James, you can tell us how the society on the Earth has been destroyed before, and I want you to elaborate on how we are at risk repeating this same thing that's happened again in our previous history.
There are a number of problems. I've got to say that I'm quite touched by nice things that people just said about me, and I hope I can earn them. But the pattern is that something that my colleague Crystal detected is that farmer lineages that went through this, and generally the same pattern, because caste systems developed. They did in China during the Warring States period, predominantly, and the first powerful emperor united China and then consolidated the empire under Genghis Khan. And then you begin to understand nationalism in terms of necessity, and then you understand that a ruling class develops, and then the ruling class becomes more and more remote from the ruled and begins to sublimate its existence as distorting reality to build a case for deserving the privileges that they have. When you add the split consciousness to these formulations, then you really get into problems, because somewhere along the line, as technology develops, the temptation to use the split consciousness as a means of enhancing your control over the labor class or the slaves or whatever it is at whatever time that empire is developed becomes bizarre. And then you have this paranoia on the side of the elite who know that their excesses are not justified. What they would do were they the underdog. And so they develop more and more means of securing their power at the expense of everyone else. And at some point or another, it becomes a thing of its own. It develops its own mind. And you have today a technology that's just renegated from common sense, common reason, the sense of survival. You have laboratories all over the country working on a more virulent disease, creating a vaccine to kill people with. Just one thing after another, biochemical weapons, additives to the water that will enhance docility in people, like lithium. And they are now adding lithium to your drinking water. Ask yourself why. The problems are a path. They're dictated to by a set of alternatives that are taken at some point where the caste system of the elite becomes self-deciding. And it just gets worse and worse. They try to ameliorate the guilt they feel over the harm that they've done to the earth and to its people by adopting antagonistic beliefs and rituals. The latest flavor has become Satanism, and the latest indulgence has become pedophilia. And, these are the drugs of preference by the elite. And if you expose the people that supply them, their children, if you expose the people that supply the drug use in America and elsewhere, you find that they're behind them, that the federal government and military have been encroaching upon organized crime, taking over. And they've done it locally, and now they're moving ahead. Organized crime, big-time organized crime, has gone into big business. And big business is suddenly using their methods. You hear for the first time of corporate sabotage, corporate espionage, and all of this supplying more and more business for the military defense industry, military-industrial complex. And the head of the beast now has become so multifaceted that to put your thumb on the core evil is impossible. It is so far gone. But for people that want change, it begins with holding the people that are in public office and that have taken a vow to support the Constitution and preserve it accountable for being traitors. You start there. You clean up the judges that are in all the courts that have been infiltrated by the Illuminati, that is the paid organized crime army of the Rothschilds. And you take it one step at a time, but you're relentless. And once you start cleaning up, they'll be just like rats trying to jump off a ship, because you have right on your side. You have the law on your side. They have selectively enforced the law. Have you ever wondered how some of the most odious criminals, the ones that abuse women, serial killers and so forth, get off? Have you ever wondered how O.J. Simpson got off?
Yeah.
Well, it's real simple. These loopholes exist so that the children of the elite that commit these crimes, and they're more prone to than anyone else, have the loopholes to get off with it. And you take someone like O.J. Simpson, he's not in the elite, but he's got a couple of $1 million to pay Mr. Cochran, who'll come in and say the magic words that will get him off, although Cochran knows that when I say these words, I'll never be able to practice law in California again, but who cares? I got $2 million, right? And you know what the words were?
What, racist?
No. The words were, he got one of the state's medical professionals, experts, on the stand. He asked him this one question. He said, how many of the lab reports are in error? What's the percentage? And the guy had to tell the truth, 40%.
Wow.
Yeah, and that got O.J. off because the DNA evidence was there, wasn't it?
Wow.
But let me tell you something. Some poor guy that's innocent and has been framed or they've made a mistake with the DNA analysis or whatever, he gets up there, he is damned. Mm-hmm. And you have one of these lab technicians that has just been arrested and convicted or is facing conviction for fixing the state's evidence for conviction fraudulently in thousands of cases.
Wow, that's so profound. Very interesting stuff indeed, guys. I want to thank all of you for coming on the show once again. What a fascinating conversation. It's so interesting whenever I get people like us together, and we talk about Fukushima, but we also end up talking about the bigger picture of things and trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And I want to hear again from Torz, and let's hear from Torz first about the EMVs and how the EMVs play into all this picture. So, Torz, did you hear any of that I was saying? Okay.
I don't know if I'm the most qualified person to do it, though, to be fair.
Take a shot.
Take a shot. Okay. When they take a child of my daughter's age, 13, or even all the way up to 18, when they ask me what happens after death, I now have the information to be able to give them because that was my question that I always wanted to know, what happens after death. From James, I have learned that mind is not brain and brain is not mind. Mind is separate. It is a consciousness that is not contained within the head, and that the soul is, if you want to call it, the battery which powers the human drive, the human emotions, the human urge, the human want to know. So you have mind and soul when we are here, and upon death, the mind and soul combine to become spirit. Now, spirit, I don't fully understand, to be fair.
Well, let me throw something in here, Torz. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
I'm not sure where James stands on this, but I'm of the opinion that the human spirit lives multiple lifetimes, and basically the human spirit is basically an eternal thing. James also talks about the EMVs in other ages when our entire Earth was basically wiped out. And he talks about, I think he has mentioned being inside the EMVs between lifetimes. James, can you correct me on any of that and elaborate, please?
Well, I have an affinity with the EMVs, and all my life I didn't really realize a number of things until finally it was made plain to me. I thought I slept like everyone else. I thought I dreamed like everyone else, but I didn't. And I began to realize I was an adult before I began to realize that I wasn't like everyone else. Things that happened to me that I just put out of mind and out of my thinking to go on with my everyday life. But there were things that marked my difference. And finally, I had an experience in Utah. Throughout my life, it seemed like I was being directed into these experiences, being tailor-made for what purpose I can't clearly define today. But I was in Utah, down on the Little Dolores River, had some claims, and I had some people with me. We were down there. I was trying to prove out a way of recovering this very, very fine gold. These were patent claims, and I had permission by the owners of them who wanted their assessment work done by me. And I was also doing some prospecting, and the people down there were very neat people. I met them through a fellow that I picked up on the way. I was coming up on a trip up on the west slope of the Rocky Mountains, coming right through Monarch Pass, and I turned on this plateau, and I saw him, and he had his arm all wrapped up in his sleeping bag like it was hurt. So I pulled over, and he had a very severe cut and was bleeding, and using the only thing he had to try to make a tourniquet was that sleeping bag. So I pulled over, I stopped the bleeding, and he and I started talking. At the time, I had some claims on the Gunnison River outside of the last town before you hit Grand Junction. It came to Grand Junction. So I took him there, and then later on we got to be friends, and he wanted to stay, and he invited some of his friends in, and we all went down on Little Dolores. So one day I had gone into town, and because the river was up, I had gone over this national park area, which was a 4-hour trip because it was only maybe 40-some-odd miles through this park, but it was jeep roads. So by the time I got the supplies and I was coming back, it was 2:30 or 3 in the morning, and I pulled up on this ridge. And this was just before you start going down into the river bottom, not very far from where our camp was. When I pulled off the road and I was going to lay down and get a little sleep or rest, I pull off and I see these UFOs, and they're in a string. There are UFOs that are going down to this tower rock, going around it, and then coming back, and then going out of sight behind some cliffs. I could see about well over 20 at one time. I've had experience with UFOs before, and these I didn't feel were EB. I didn't feel that they were a threat. So I start walking down this incline to this creek wash. And when I do, they come out of formation and form the typical V. I feel like, I get a kind of communication, go back, rest. We'll take care of this sort of thing. So I go back to my little Datsun 510 station wagon, get in the back and lay down to rest. And in the morning, I wake up from this rest, which is, I don't sleep like you do. But I get up and suddenly, if I think about them, what's going on, I know that they're driving engines that are deep in the earth, that this action of them going back and forth is driving a very strong energy field in what it's doing down below. And suddenly I think about what's down there, and I see this EMV. And then I wonder what's in the EMV, and I'm inside the EMV. And then everything that I think about, it's like turning a vernier dial. I get a fine reading, it just explodes. And that was for the next year or so, that's what went on. And I realized, and then I start going out places that are isolated and making contact with ETs and going places with ETs and recognizing, what I'm here for. And what I decided to do, and making understandings with the ETs, and I realized that I am the liaison between the EMVs and the ETs.
How did that make you feel, James, when you first woke up? What did you feel emotionally?
Well, when I first woke up, I was just blah, like, where were they? Because, it's daylight, and there wasn't anything down there, and I was looking down at and then I started thinking about what were they doing, and then all of a sudden, bang. From then on, it was like I was accessing, I had this computer in my head, and I was accessing files, and it just went on, and it never stopped. Still happens to some degree. Still happens.
So over the course of a year, you said over the course of a year, you learned who you were, what your purpose was, and why you were here. I take it in the course of that year, you then had the information given to you of all of your history, how did that make you feel? Did it bring with it a sense of great responsibility? I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, whereby I know you because I've spent so long talking to you, but I know the listeners, this is a question that the listeners will want to hear.
It made things that had happened to me make sense. I finally felt it freed me from the sense of being persecuted, because when I was 6 years old, someone tried to kill me. And when I was 4 years old, medical people put a thing in the back of my head after a UFO incident. And this made me look over my shoulder and made me wonder, what's next? But after that, I realized that I had my own means of protection. So it didn't matter anymore. It freed me. It freed me from a sense of having to be guarded. And it was a wonderful feeling. I began to realize that my consciousness was more than consciousness, and that I had a sense of self-sufficiency that I had never known before.
I want to throw something out to the whole panel here, and this is just kind of my views on life, and maybe Torz can address this first. I think when we reincarnate, that we have kind of a consciousness block that comes down when we come into this life, so we don't have a clear memory of our past life, but somehow in the subconscious, the subconscious knows. And I think Tor's question to James was, when did you come to understand that you had a bigger purpose here? Torz, was that what you were trying to get at, something along those lines?
Yeah, but James actually wrote something really interesting. It's on the blog, and if you don't mind, I'd like to read it out because it's quite profound and it makes a lot of sense. It's called Why Do We Incarnate? Is it all right if I read it out?
Please, of course. Yeah.
This was actually asked by my 15-year-old son at the time who was talking to James, and he asked the question, why do we incarnate? James's answer was, everything mimics the structure of the universe, including the soul possessed. It abides change to grow, and so it cycles from its lowest common denominator to its highest until it expresses the ultimate of what it can be. It is the only meaning for sentience over that consciousness of lower form. Sooner or later, the expression of what it can be begins new worlds, and it will last until every possibility, every grain of potential has been realized, and then it will all end, and the mind it has satisfied will look for new horizons. Think of planetary systems as cells of the brain of one enormous mind. What goes on between the electrical exchanges, ether of acknowledgement, ever growing until everything that can be has been incorporated and understood, where ages are instant and seconds are infinite.
Wow, you talk about profound. We'll have to come back to that. I'd have to read that about 10 times to really appreciate it.
It's on the front page of the blog, and it's very interesting.
I have a caller here. I'm going to bring 920 on the line. He's been waiting for about 3 minutes. 920, how are you today?
Great, Mark. This is Aaron. How you doing?
Aaron, thanks for calling in. I bet you have an interesting comment.
Well, I always have interesting comments. I sent you that link today. That was a pretty interesting thing. And, of course, Fukushima always is a terrible prospect to contemplate, or dilemma, being stuck on this planet and being subject to whatever these maniacal people put in our ways. Yeah, it's the more I think about it, the more I think the Amish had a pretty good idea.
The Amish in the sense of kind of living a simple life and a spiritual life?
Yes, exactly. That's
well, maybe I can get Mhairead to comment on that. She seems like a person that lives a spiritual life to me. I'd like to get her to comment.
It's funny, I was thinking about the Amish the other day and thinking the same thing, except I don't think I would look very good in their outfits and the whole kind of the whole sort of, Old Testament kind of approach doesn't really fit me. But I suppose what I could say is that if we are evolving and progressing as a race, which we're supposed to be, what I used to think was, when I was younger, was why are things getting worse instead of better? And we have all this technology, and particularly because I was about 8 when we allegedly went to the moon and walked upon it. And I remember my dad taking us out to point to the moon and say, that's what we're doing, and thinking, wow, and after this it'll just be amazing and we'll be flying about and, it'll be all quite fantastic. And it's not. It's look at it. Look at what we're doing to the planet we live on. So we couldn't all live like the Amish people. It wouldn't really work. But at the same time, living in harmony with nature, Mother Nature is here to support and uphold life. And what they seem to be doing, to my way of thinking, is doing everything they can to prevent that balance from happening and continuing on. And I'm not just thinking about nuclearism. When I talk about that, I'm thinking about the genetic modification of the seeds. We're losing our bees. We're losing so much every single day that's here to support and uphold life, and something has got to change.
Very, very wise words, Mhairead, that you bring out here. I also think the show has kind of a historic feel about it, like a profound truth is being revealed. And I want to ask Torz, I'm sure she's had this same feeling herself when she's done shows with James or when she's posted information on the blog. Can you comment, Torz?
Mm-hmm. Very much so, Mark. Yeah, very much so. It has been profound, and profound is the perfect word for it, because information, just through conversations, and they were just conversations that I've had with James over the years, have expanded my consciousness, if you want to call it that. The mind is split. We have the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. I feel very much that my conscious mind and my unconscious mind has somehow been given the opportunity to re-knit together with information that I was not consciously aware of before I met James. And yeah, the information that I've discovered has been profound, because it has allowed me to view the planet and the people on it and everything that's happening, not from the viewpoint of standing on the planet, but from removing my consciousness to an outside view and encompassing not just our planet, but our solar system, the universe, and so much more.
If I could just say something else as well, is that James is the first person I've come across who has addressed anomalies. And that's what Kevin Smith was doing. And I didn't really discover Kevin Smith until later on. And then through Crystal Clark, I discovered James. She introduced me to James's work. That is the thing that people who are interested in this field, I think, discover about James as well, is that he'll talk about anomalies. He'll explain things about the moon that have not been fully explained before. And you've probably experienced that yourself, Mark. And you just kind of get those moments where you think, of course, and it all falls away. Yeah, exactly. And you remember. There's this strange experience that you have. I had it out walking today, and I don't ask for it to come. I'm walking along, and it just floods me, this feeling of having done this before, this feeling of remembering. And when I heard James talk about the EMBs, I had that same feeling in my body. I thought, yes, that's it. I remember this now. I suppose that's an emotional experience. Not everybody's going to have that. But if you've got questions to ask, then you can go to the blog and find a lot of answers there before you've even decided to ask James himself a question. And not many people out there are doing that these days. So it's important. It's profound.
There's one other person that I found that I think, anyway, brings information that is as profound as what James Horak brings to the table. And I want to read one of his writings here. And this comes from a humble one-armed farmer in Switzerland. He writes, rivers, stones, plants, animals, lakes, seas, brooks, springs, the air and water, trees and bushes, and everything that crawls and flies here on the earth are life forms with a spirit form, with many of them being connected by psychic vibrations. All of them are wise and heightened too, that communicate with one another, all knowing about their common existence among one another. The consciousness and psyche of all creatures are in turn bound on a journey through time incorporating very many bodily existences through the innumerable forms in which life appears. In this process, death is a passage to rebirth, as well as the conversion into the other world, the world of pure spirit. This is the basis for the tightly woven and indissoluble web of all life. And in this way, no life form strives to rise up over the others within their group and to set themselves up over the others, because each life form contains a basic goodness and not evil. After all, evil is learned and practiced as a result of inappropriate doings and degeneracy. Now, what I think that tells us is about this indissoluble web of life that exists on this planet. And we started out the show talking about Fukushima and the damage that this could do to our biosphere. So maybe I'll turn the conversation over to James and let him comment.
The connectivity of man to his environment we call nature. And some people have given nature a personality as goddess or as a mother. I can remember when the New Age had some validity and spoke of the Earth Mother or Mother Earth, and then degenerated off into the hogwash it is today. But we can't walk out in our backyard. We can't go out into a field. We can't look at the stars through a telescope without understanding that there is order, there is design, and beauty. And when we get away from that, when we become obsessed with money and gold and things that have no feeling, nothing to return our touch to us, then we lose that connection and the sense of values that go with it. And we become more a thing than human. And that's what's happened. Have you ever been to the New York Stock Exchange or the Chicago Commodities Exchange?
No, I've never been there.
What you see is a form of hysteria that is focused on improving one's economic condition, above all. I mean, it's totally denuded of anything else. And you see that people will trample over each other to do it. It's a roller coaster of emotions, but without concern for anyone but the bottom line of the person involved in that particular trade, in that particular motion. And it's mechanical. It doesn't even have the beauty of the inside of a watch, a well-made watch. It's a distortion. And you wonder about these poor people going through the gamut of emotions, going through the gamut of stress, what it does to them. And then you begin to realize after a while that boot camp, I don't know how many of your viewers have ever been through boot camp, but boot camp is a precursor for that sort of thing. And what's the intentions of boot camp? To make a killer out of a person without thought. And they go to the extremes. They have the super soldier. What is the super soldier? He's somebody that suffers no reaction whatsoever to killing. That's what a super soldier is. You take that one step further, what has become of those that have lost connection with appreciation of this design and an avowed gratitude to nature? Are they still human?
Wow. That's very profound. You know, you mentioned something I just can't resist, and that's that we allegedly went to the moon, you know. One of the most interesting things is that when Neil Armstrong was testing the Lunar Lander, it crashed and burned here on Earth, and then they built a new one, allegedly, and put it back into the capsule. And they started once again to go to the moon, but they didn't bother retesting any of this. Maybe I'll throw this to Torz and see what she has to say about this.
So anybody over the age of 30, maybe even 35, is just, you either know or you don't know. Personally, I think that there is absolutely no way that they could possibly get to the moon without the help of the EVs. And I have discussed this with James quite in depth. And I do believe that they did get to the moon. However, they didn't get there on the back of a rocket, that's for sure. I believe that EV took them there. I may be wrong. Who knows? Wouldn't it just be fabulous if mankind found out the truth, wouldn't it just?
Mhairead, do you have any, have you studied this at all?
Not in depth, no, but I've talked to James, I've asked him some questions about it, and I agree with Torz with the EV help, the technology that they offer. I mean, the thing that I remember as a kid was watching it on television, and at the same time, you probably don't have it. It's a children's program called The Clangers, and thinking that looks like the little Clanger spaceship with tinfoil around it. Even to this day, I look and I think, how on earth was that supposed to happen? I mean,
but it's what you said, Mhairead. Sorry to interrupt, but that's exactly what you said. Whereby, oh God, my mind's just gone blank. I'm so sorry. Carry on.
Where are we not further ahead, having made that so-called achievement? Yeah.
One thing I wanted to bring out about the Lunar Lander is that it literally had tin foil around it, and the engineers would say you could literally stick your finger through the tin foil that was on the Lunar Lander, as if that was some kind of protection against radiation. James, can you comment on that?
Well, there is no protection. With earthbound technology, there is no protection from the cosmic bombardment that's going to hit you once that you get to the Van Allen belt and beyond. It's going to kill you, and it's going to kill you in short order. Even the pilots that flew the U-2s at 60-some-odd thousand feet lost their hair. They didn't even have eyebrows. They'd lose their teeth. A number of things had happened to them, and I got in the habit when I was out at the base. Every time I saw a pilot, I'd ask him, I said, "Do you fly over a certain amount of feet?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, you need radical mineral replacement." And I told him what he needed. Well, about 6 months ago, I was out at the base, and this pilot walked up to me, and he said, "You told me about that radical mineral replacement." And he said, "I found out you're right, and I've been doing it, and I want to thank you, and my buddies want to thank you." So that was gratifying. So there's so many things that go on. Of course, today we don't have the protection we had years ago. If you notice, the sunlight is whiter, which means it's less filtered, and it's killing trees, killing your grass. I had some ivy growing on the side of my garage. I've lived here in this house about 22 years, and it's always been there. Well, a couple of years ago, I noticed that towards the end of the summer that most of it would die, and finally it just all died. And it was only exposed where it was to the sun around 3 o'clock or so. So it was only getting about 4 hours of direct sunlight, and it was killing that ivy that had been there, flourishing there all those years. Of course, anybody that will tell you that the atmosphere does not have life, or that the stratosphere doesn't have life, or that the ionosphere doesn't have life, doesn't know what they're talking about. There's life everywhere, and the astronauts, when they were in space, in close proximity to the Earth, 17, 18, up to 30 miles above the Earth, they knew that there were critters out there because these critters would almost come up to their face. And you see some pictures of them in some of the videos, and there's no explanation for it. And they'll try, officials from NASA and JPL try to give you some hogwash about, well, that's an aberration or whatever. Well, it's an aberration to them because they can't explain it. So they want to tell you that it's not real. That's what science on this planet is degenerated to. If they don't have an answer for it, it's not real.
Well, we kind of went off topic here a little bit, but
I think it's quite interesting that you bring up the moon, actually, because the very fact that we have a consciousness is because, and James would probably be able to explain this better than I would, the machines that are in the Earth's crust that are controlled by the moon are out of line, as it were. But this has been happening for a long time. And we have a split consciousness because of it. So therefore, I think it's something to do with gravity waves. And like I said, James would be much, much better to explain it than I would. It's not in sync. So therefore, it is an unrealistic state of consciousness whereby we have a split consciousness, and the conscious mind and the unconscious mind are not complete. They do not mix together. So where James says he only has to think of something and the information comes to him, With us, it's not the same. We do not have that genetic knowledge that we can use and go forward with, because if we all had the genetic knowledge that we need to work upon, we wouldn't actually be in the state that we are in now, because we'd know and we'd be able to change things, and things would never have got to literally to the state that we're in now. And it's very important to make note of the fact that the moon is an integral part of that.
James, please comment.
When our ancestors put the moon in orbit around the Earth, they did so with the help of very advanced people that were on Mars at the time your ancestors came into the system. And they first took up living on Mars. And with the moon, they brought life to Mars. They made mistakes on Mars, and after 50,000 years came to the Earth. The Earth at the time was violent. So placing the moon around the Earth, they were able to calm the Earth down so that it was a more habitable place. And this process took 20,000 years. It was required because the moon is not the correct proportion to be a moon around this planet. So these instruments had to be put in place, machines in the moon and engines on the Earth, to make adjustments to keep the Earth from wandering too far out or coming too close in. And these adjustments are going on probably the longest they're not operating or creating an adjustment is 45 minutes. Astrophysicists have observed that there are magnetic and gravitational fluctuations on the moon that are in line with the same thing happening on Earth. So they know there's an association there. They just don't want to ever touch that subject because it implies artificiality. It implies design. It implies somebody is doing something, and it's way beyond our concept to understand. You know, they're God, really. You know, they're about to find the God particle, aren't they? I mean, really. So, you know, the ego of man on Earth is insurmountable. So all these anomalies that crop up, the last thing they want to admit is, well, this is beyond us to understand. No, they're not going to do that. They just say, oh, this is an anomaly. That name is supposed to imply some understanding. It doesn't. What it implies is, I don't know. That's what it implies. So they put it on a shelf, label it, put it on the shelf, forget about it. Because it's embarrassing to them, you know. It's embarrassing. All these years of education to get my PhD, got my meal ticket in my hot little hand, now work for the government, and they tell me what to think. Tell me what to say, give me a little piece of the pie, so I have no overview, so they don't have to worry about me knowing too much. That's a scientist in the United States today. Most of them. 90%, 95% of them.
Torz, please comment.
And woe betide, you should actually step out of line, as it were, and actually begin to investigate something that might actually answer the questions to the anomaly that they find, because lo and behold, all of a sudden your tenure has gone. So
like Dr. Norman Bergman.
Yeah. It is a self-perpetuating system whereby corruption controls everybody. Do as you're told, or you lose your tenure. Don't investigate that anomaly, or you'll lose your tenure. And you know, we all live in a society whereby we have to use this paper money that we've invented in order to eat.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting because, and this gets back to Fukushima, now we have this incredibly bizarre situation where literally the biosphere of the planet is at risk, and yet the mainstream media will not touch it. Torz, go ahead.
Yeah, it's, do you know what? It's disgusting, it's despicable, it's shocking. I'm embarrassed for the human race. I really am. And I rack my brains as to what it is little old me can do. And the only thing we can do is speak out about it, is shout about it to the rooftops, to anybody that will listen, with facts.
Well, maybe at some point I can get some politicians on the radio show. I don't know. Mhairead, do you have any comment?
Well, I don't know if the politicians will speak out because of the same situation with the scientists. You know, they're too afraid of their whatever money they have, as they're lining their pockets, etc. I mean, what's happening in Japan is really quite horrific. In the latest story where they were talking about taking homeless people off the streets to be part of the cleanup campaign just saddened me enormously. I mean, there's every story that comes out there. The children with early signs of thyroid problems, the mothers who took the soil from the nurseries, the radioactive soil from the nurseries where their children are playing, to the equivalent of whatever the EPA or whatever it is in Japan. It's, to say to them, you're not telling us about this. And the farmers, talking about the food that they're selling that they wouldn't eat themselves because it's not being cleaned up. So you've got the microcosm and the macrocosm going on. You've got people actually in that country who are already suffering, and all the stuff that's happening in the ocean. So it's a huge, huge problem. But what we've been talking about tonight is looking at the bigger picture and where everything fits in. And it is relevant in that we're all on one planet. There is no way we can get off this planet. We're here until it's all over, and we all have a responsibility to do what we can. And if talking about Fukushima and getting on, making a YouTube video, taking part in the protests that are out there, stepping up to the mark a wee bit, makes a difference, then, I do what little I can, and it's nothing in comparison to what some of the activists out there have been doing for the last 3 years and previous to it. Just anti-nuclear activists to start with. So,
what's interesting about Fukushima is that I don't think this problem can be hidden, and this is a different thing. I'd like to hear what James has to say about that. They can't hide Fukushima. I think we're going to see birth defects in Tokyo that are going to be like the children born in Fallujah. I don't see how that they can hide this over time.
Can I make a statement, a direct statement to the powers that be, to the elite?
Sure, go ahead. They're probably listening.
I'd like to say this, that if you think, after you conduct your depopulation, that then you can come to the table with ET to solve this problem for yourselves, think again. You will either get your act together now, come to the table with ET, and come to terms, or you will all perish together. No two ways about it.
Well, that's a profound statement, and this kind of goes back to the EMVs. James, maybe you could tell the listeners a little bit about what's happened during all these epochs where society has to be restarted.
It's pretty redundant, really. It's had different aspects to it, but it's always the same thing. You don't outgrow your technology, and it destroys you. In one case, you tried to tap the mantle, just like you did on Mars. Big mistake. When you think that you are greater than the design that made this home for you, that made you a steward of nature, not a master of it. See, that's one thing, the arrogance of science on this planet can't comprehend. That they aren't masters of nature. They are servants. And you are stewards of what you've been given. And you owe that humility to whoever it is, whatever it is, it's above us all. And like I say, I'm no closer to the face of God than anyone here. But I'll say this. I see the design. And I don't doubt that there is a designer.
It's interesting that we've kind of come full circle here, and I want to thank all you guys for coming on. It's been a real pleasure to chat with all of you. We've got about 5 minutes left on the stream. I feel kind of compelled to go back to Torz again. If you have any comments, please fire away, Torz.
I'd like to echo what Mhairead said, actually, in the fact that we are a self-contained bubble. We are all on this planet together. There are nigh on 7 billion of us now. There is nowhere else to go. At what point will the madness stop, and will the people realize and open their eyes and really understand that there is a very, very, very small percentage that are trying to destroy the rest of it for everybody else. We have to come together as a species to stop what has happened, to make contact, to ask for help in order to fix Fukushima, because Fukushima is effectively an extinction-level event. We cannot survive what has happened without serious repercussions. And if we are to fix it, we have to stop those who have created it. And the only way we can fix this is with outside help. So people on the inside who are unhappy with what is happening, they need to come forward. They need to know that there are people out here who will be there to support them when they speak out. And we have to fix this. We have to do something now before it gets any worse. Or, like James said, this planet will end and it will become a sun for another civilization to thrive. Do we really want that? Do we want humanity to just go poof and disappear? Everything that we have done, gone.
James, if you have any closing statements, do you think we can ask for help?
It's already been offered. It's already been offered. You were warned about nuclear energy. That's what Operation High Jump was all about. You have ignored it because it was so profitable to the few, and now you're paying for it. So I think that the elite are a lost cause. They're not subject to persuasion. They're on a mad course. The idea of giving up any of their power, it's no longer a matter of privilege. It's no longer a matter of leisure. It's no longer a matter of luxury. It's madness. Absolute madness. I mean, how much is enough money? There is not enough money for them. There is not enough, they want the power of life and death over all of us. They've carried this to the point of delusion. And they actually can satisfy themselves with the idea that they have been the agent of the destruction. That's absolute evil. That's unpardonable. There is no rationalizing it to a sane mind. None at all.
Well, I want to thank my three esteemed guests, James C. Horak, Mhairead, McDonald, and Torz, for coming on this evening. I'm going to end our Blog Talk stream on this profound statement by James, and I want to wish you all a very good afternoon.